I hope you're all doing well despite the ongoing pandemic. I am Atty. Loraine Saguinsin from BG Center of Union Bank Private Banking, and I would like to welcome everyone to the NextGen Academy Online 2021. We have assembled a roster of subject matter experts from Union Bank and from our strategic ally, Global Private Bank Lombard Odier, to discuss various topics designed to empower and set the entrepreneurial foundation for next generation family business leaders. This program is designed to equip you, the next gen, with the tools and insights needed to propel your family business into the future amidst a global pandemic. Of course, as much as we would have wanted to hold this event in person so we could meet and get to know all of you, present conditions prohibit us from doing so. Regardless, we would still love to hear from you guys, of course, the audience. During the speaker's presentation, please feel free to send your questions on the Q&A chat box panel or have them ready for the live Q&A sessions. Our YouTube viewers may also type the questions via the YouTube chat box. For those in our Zoom call this afternoon, you may also opt to raise your hands to ask a live question during the Q&A portion. A member from our team will unmute you and give the panelists a heads up so you can ask your questions. Now, to start off our program, I'd like to call on Atty. Arlene Agustin, Head of Union Bank Private Banking, to give the welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon. It is an honor to welcome all of you to Union Bank Private Banking's NextGen Academy 2021. Every year since 2019, we really look forward to this special two-day event where we gather the next generation family members of our valued customers, you who are with us today. The NextGen Academy was conceptualized and launched with the aim to equip you with insights and tools to help you to strategically navigate your family businesses into the future, especially amidst the disruption brought about by the global pandemic. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this program. This was organized in collaboration with our strategic ally, global Swiss-based private bank Lombard Odier. I would also like to welcome our guest speakers, panelists, and the other next-gen batches from 2019 and 2020. Thank you to our friends who are with us today from Lombard Odier all the way from Hong Kong and Singapore. We are joined by Jean-Louis Nakamura, Chief Investment Officer for Asia, Wong, Head of Family Services for Asia, and Vanessa Raymundo, Executive Director for Strategic Alliances. And from Union Bank, we have our very own June Tarrobago Jr., Chief Investment Officer for Trust, and Sonny Ordonez, Head of Investments for Private Banking. Our mission as your private bankers is to fulfill each client's aspiration of achieving and growing your wealth, accumulating it for the long term, and eventually passing it on to the next generation through an efficient and innovative channel. Our digital innovation and deep understanding of local markets, together with Lombard Odier's more than 2 centuries experience in global investment and wealth management across generations, allow us to deliver a private banking experience that is unparalleled in the Philippine market. In this two-day program, you will be exposed to local and global industry professionals who are experts in their respective fields. They will impart wisdom on holistic approaches to wealth planning and succession, sustainable investments, and integrating sustainability into the family business. The NextGen Academy is our multi-awarded flagship event It has garnered several highly acclaimed recognitions by global private banking award-giving institutions. We are very proud to extend this to all of you. And as much as we would have loved to meet all of you in person, we once again had to adjust to the pandemic and the restrictions we currently have. We look forward to doing this in person for the years to come. It is our fervent hope that this academy will empower you to embrace your role as NextGen, because the success and future of your family businesses and the legacy you dream of building is very much a big part of your responsibility as NextGen leaders. We welcome all of you, the NextGen class of 2021. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the program. Back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Atty. Arlene, for the wonderful welcoming words to our NextGen participants. Now, may I introduce our panelists for today's discussion on investments. The first panelist is John Louis Nakamura, Chief Investment Officer, Asia Lombard ODA. John Louis joined Lombard ODA in March 2008 to head the executive board of the Paris office. Later in the year, he transferred to the head office in Geneva as the head of the quantitative and overlay management team, and later on was appointed Deputy Global CIO of LOIM and eventually CIO Asia Pacific and CEO Hong Kong. Now our second panelist is Julian Tarrobago Jr., Chief Investment Officer, UnionBank. Julian Tarrobago Jr., or June as he is known, is a fund manager with 26 years of experience in domestic and international equities, the last few years of which were spent in a role of head of equities of the Philippines' leading independent asset manager. Last but not the least is Cesar Antonino Sonny Ordonez Jr., Head of Investments, UnionBank Private Banking. Cesar Antonino M. Ordonez Jr., known in the industry as Sonny, has more than 20 years in the finance industry, working in the dealership, corporate banking, fixed income fund management, and research units of various banks and institutions. The investments panel will be moderated by Vanessa Raymundo, Executive Director for Strategic Alliances, Lombard ODA. Now, Vanessa, please take the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon and a very big welcome to the participants of this year's UnionBank Private Banking NextGen Academy. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. And of course, a very big welcome again to our esteemed panel, Jean-Louis, June, and Sonny. My name is Vanessa, and I will be moderating this short but hopefully insightful conversation where we will be presenting our investment outlook, as well as seeking to answer this question of whether sustainability is a compelling investment conviction and how do we play it. So let's start things off with Jean-Louis. Jean-Louis, the last year and 10 months has been quite unprecedented. The global pandemic has tested the limits of human resilience, the resolve of governments and central banks around the world, and even the strength of international relations. It has forced us to rethink our values, the way we live, and perhaps even the way that we invest. In your view, how has the pandemic changed investing? And I guess more forward-looking, what can the global investor expect in 2022?
Thank you, Vanessa. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Again, it's a real pleasure to be with you, even if it's through that virtual event. I think we have to live with that kind of organization so far, and it may continue for some time, but I really look forward to be able to meet with you again in person in the near future. So as you said, Vanessa, and it was part of your question, this pandemic has really changed a lot of things, and it has changed the way we live. And I think we will all agree that it has initiated a business cycle which has nothing to to do and to look like the other ones. It's extremely unusual business cycle we are living with since the recession that has been triggered by the pandemic in March 2020. The shock was then completely unprecedented, as you said, not only in terms of magnitude, but in terms of nature. It was overly concentrated over a few weeks, and then started a recovery which itself has been extremely spectacular. And mostly due, as we all know today, because of the stark, very fast and completely extraordinary sized answer from policymakers, both on the monetary and on the fiscal side. So we had to live also with this incredibly fast recovery, but at the same time, this recovery has been also incredibly imbalanced. We had a surge in demand for goods, for manufacturing goods, while at the same time, during the social restriction period in most advanced economies, services have been highly impacted. We had a big difference between internal consumption and external trade initially that has reversed, or at least which has rebalanced a little bit in the aftermath. And since we have seen the beginning of this surge in demand in the recovery on the demand side, we have seen also the manufacturing sector, the supply side of the manufacturing sector, to be impacted by a succession of shocks, bottlenecks, restrictions, which has led to the situation we know today, where you had a lot of price pressure in the system. So in terms of economic data, it has been spectacular because we have moved from an extremely negative 18 months ago to an extremely positive today. And probably today, the inflation figures, the employment figures are the last or the latest lagged variables in the economic system, which are the result of those extreme swings. Okay? So what we can say about this business cycle? Today we have the most advanced economies such as the US or Europe, which are probably in what is usually called the mid. Most of the you lead your economy either at a pace consistent with your long-term potential or slightly lower. This is a situation where the US and Europe lie today. The business cycle could last because in that kind of mid-cycle stage, economics could stay very long. Last long cycle, it was the longest ever recorded. Okay, and the capacity of the global economy to stay in that nice, what we used to call Goldilocks situation, where growth will not be so extreme but still very strong, or strong enough at least, and price pressure will not be excessively high, is highly dependent on the capacity of the policymakers, and especially of the central banks, to keep financial conditions accommodative enough to have this business cycle to last long. And in that context, the real elephant in the room is precisely inflation. Because at the same time that we have economies which have been entering into this mid-cycle stage, you have inflation data which are more representative of usual late cycle stage, where you start to see, as you can picture on that slide, you get to see a lot of factors, a lot of price pressure usually that you see when the cycle is about to end, which is not the case. Normally, from a pure production point of view, from a pure consumption point of view, there is still a lot to run, there is still a lot to go. But inflation figures are more consistent with a situation, an economic situation, which usually we face when the economic cycle is about to end, because central banks will have to tighten their monetary policy and to trigger, to some extent, a recession in economic conditions. So there is a desynchronization between where we stand in terms of economic production, consumption point of view, and when the inflation figures are. And this desynchronization, we continue to believe that it is 80% due or the results of the disruption triggered by the COVID situation. And on that slide, Each green arrow you see are factors that we do believe should global inflation. The red arrow, by contrast, are factors that may contribute to spreading inflation to make it a bit more persistent, especially in the case of the US, such as, for instance, the fact that in the US, we start seeing price pressure spreading to rents. And as they spread to rents, they might contaminate more wages, and they might contribute to a spreading of consumer inflation into long-term core inflation. But it's only specific to a few economies, even if it's a big one, such as the US and to a lower extent Germany. Other economies are in a completely different situation. In China, you don't have this kind of hyperinflation. In many emerging countries, you don't face this situation of hyperinflation yet. In Japan, you are still lagging a lot, both in terms of recovery and in terms of inflation. So the situation is that will central bank capitulate in front of unusually high inflation at this stage of the business cycle, tighten their monetary conditions, and then end the business cycle prematurely? We don't think so. If you move to the next slide, we still have a view that next year will be a year where, because central banks will continue to be patient enough and will not overreact to the level of current inflation, and because of many of the bottlenecks in the global economy starting to fade, we already see, the average waiting time for ships in China ports, but also in US ports, moving down significantly. We are seeing the price of energy commodities such as China coal or European gas to drop very significantly over the last few weeks. So we are seeing many of and a very huge increase in inflation figures to ease. And we believe that it should continue, provided that we do not face a new supply shock in 2022. And as a result of this, you will have major economies such as the US, the Eurozone, the Euro area, moving on the UK, for instance, moving to a situation of extremely high growth and very high inflation, to a situation where growth will be lower but still above potential, with lower price pressure. And it will create the room for their central banks not to overreact to current inflation. As I said before, you have countries, large economies, which are not exactly in the same situation. China was much ahead of the curve, was much ahead of the business cycle. It was the first big economy to fully recover from the COVID crisis in 2020. Since early 2021, its economic policy was the first one to tighten financial conditions and fiscal conditions. As a result of this, the Chinese economy has faced a significant slowdown this year, which leads the China GDP to slow down around 5% year on year in terms of growth, which is a very low level for China. We expect China macro policy, by contrast with the other policy, to reflect the economy going forward, and China progressively should accelerate again. It will not be seen in the actual average of growth 2022 for China, because the average will take into account the last months of 2021 and the first months of 2022, which will be still very weak. But on average, in terms of dynamic, China should be one of the first economy not to decelerate, but to reaccelerate from a very low point, with some acceleration in price pressures, some. Economies such as Japan, among the most developed economies, are behind the curve, unlike China. They still have a lot to run in terms of economic growth, and they might see also some pressure in price, but from very, very low levels. So we expect inflation in Japan to hardly stand between 1.5 and 2%, which is still very low in comparison with the other countries, but very high in comparison with the distribution of inflation over the last 20 years in Japan. So again, if you move to the next slide, this kind of scenario for next year lead us to be quite, I will not say optimistic, but quite constructive on the fact that, unlike what the market is pricing today, where the market start to price earlier and faster hikes in Fed fund rates from the Federal Reserve in the US, we do believe that the Fed will be slightly more patient, will not deteriorate financial condition excessively fast, and it should allow the current business cycle to expand a little further and not to end prematurely. Of course, this scenario is extremely fragile. We might see a policy mistake earlier next year. We might see the persistence of inflation, unlike what we were just saying. We might see renewed bottlenecks on the supply side of the global economy. And if it is the case, the chance or the possibility of global financial condition to tighten faster and wider than what we have in mind would be bigger. And then the risk of seeing the current business cycle to end prematurely will be also higher. This is probably the major risk waiting on our scenario for next year. So with this in mind, you asked a question, Vanessa, how should we invest after the COVID? My opinion on this did not change, even if we had seen a lot of dramatic swing in economic data, a lot of shock which we were not used to. The basic principles of investing next year should remain more or less the same that the one we have always claimed in the past, and you know that. The first one is that given what we have in mind, not only in terms of central scenario, but in terms of risk possibilities and the risk of a premature policy mistake, ending the business cycle prematurely, it's always important to remain diversified. Diversification this year was not very well rewarded because, when you look at the distribution of return in the market, the best things to be done this year would have to be long of a tracker, the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq, and then you will have still make 20% of return in US dollar, which would have been very, very good. Okay, but we don't know yet what will be 2022. We have some ideas. There are some huge risks waiting on that scenario. You can go in one direction and one other. Emerging markets may catch up. Credit might reverse. Credit has not been doing well this year, but there's a lot of pocket of value in the credit market. It might reverse. So being diversified will allow you also to capture some of those reversals that should come after the year we have witnessed in 2021. Beyond that diversification, if you want to concentrate a few of your trades into the segment of the market where there is probably the best value, I would say that it's probably in the East, in Asia, and especially in China. As I explained before, China securities have lagged significantly the rest of the market because of the restriction of economic condition in China. Next year, even if it will not be obvious in the China GDP growth on average, should be the year of reflation, the year of re-acceleration of the China growth, and of course, as usual, markets will try to anticipate on this. And finally, in terms of theme or in terms of industries, I think that quality and the capacity of companies in the current environment where their cost has been increasing very fast to preserve their margin by passing through their rise in their cost to the final consumer will be very important. Quality of the balance sheet also will be very important, especially as we have seen in China and the credit market. In terms of theme, the theme that have worked well this year, such as, of course, sustainability, electric vehicles, robotization and AI, the quality and brand premium, should continue to do very well next year, especially when crossed with some geographic segments, such, for instance, as China electric vehicle or European smart logistics.
Thank you so much, Jean-Louis. And I guess while the pandemic has, on the one hand, disrupted a little bit what we know about cycles, either moving them forward, cutting them short, some things don't change, such as diversification across asset classes and the liquidity spectrum, as you have mentioned. And as you've brought the discussion towards the east, let us look a little bit southeast and go to Sonny this time. Sonny, from the global macro picture and the outlook that Jean-Louis presented, in your view, what does it look like for the Philippine investor next year?
Next year, so basically, what we see that First, rates will go up next year, definitely, because monetary policy has played and it's entered the system. But because of inflation and possibly opening up the economy, which would lead to, let's say, more borrowings, that will raise investment there is to shorten the duration of the investment. Okay, number two, we see the exchange rate weakening because, as you know, the Philippines is a major importer of goods, raw materials, and finished ones. And as the economy will open next year, the demand for dollar would definitely increase. But as you know, majority or 70% of the Philippine economy is consumption, which is being hampered by mobility restrictions. But as you know, it is already loosening right now, and we see more people, and traffic is getting worse. So that's another indication. And some companies, sad to say, those who benefited from the opportunities brought about by the pandemic may not be able to maintain or hold their growth this year. But it doesn't mean they will contract. As you know, management would always adjust circumstances or situations like the pandemic. Others took some time, but they did change. And we expect earnings, okay, in general, the equity market, we expect the earnings to grow next year because, as I mentioned, we came from a very strict lockdown, and hopefully with the vaccination coming in, Metro Manila reaching 70% herd immunity, and the other provinces generally at 30%, we hope that the economy do not undergo the same strict restriction and allow mobility and businesses to thrive and operate. And thus, we see that companies' earnings would generally be better compared to last year. So, and that because of the earnings growing, we see that valuation of those companies in the equity markets should be better compared to for next year.
Thank you, Sonny. So as long as we are able to continue on this trajectory of economic reopening, it's been a long time coming, right? We need to stay patient, and the effects of such reopening, particularly into domestic market with exports picking up, should bode quite well for the investors who are invested in the Philippines. But that said, we need to apply, proper diversification, still continue to be selective in terms of our risk. There is value in China. We could get questions on that later. Julian will come back to that, with China preventing Tencent from launching new apps, developing new apps. We might come back to that, right? But overall, still constructive, and the important message here is to remain invested. And there are some themes specifically that we can look at. And there's, amid this pandemonium, there was one theme in the investment world that pretty much catapulted into the spotlight much faster in the last year or so than ever before. And that, Jean-Louis already mentioned, was sustainability. The transition to a net zero world has dominated, and in fact, it was the key subject in the recently concluded COP26, or UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. Now, this is a subject that is very close to your heart, June. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think the role of the financial sector is, particularly investors? What's the role that they have to play in this transition? And for investors specifically, how can they position or incorporate sustainability in their portfolios?
Thanks, Vanessa. Appreciate the question. That's like what you said, it's very near and dear to me. I think it's a very important question. What's the role of the financial sector? I think it's huge. The transition to net zero requires massive amounts of capital to be directed at both decarbonizing the economy and also building resilience. So because of this, I believe the financial sector must play a leading role in this transition. In the Philippines, for example, let's admit it, our financial institutions need to step up, not just in terms of funding green finance, but more structural in nature, making finance actually become green instead of just funding green finance. First step could be very basic. It's simply measurement and disclosure of the environmental impact, for example, of activities our financial institutions enable. After all, you cannot manage what you cannot or what you do not measure. So very basic. These could be these could be integrated in terms of banks giving out loans, asset managers like us allocating investments, and insurance underwriting. Um, I would guess there is no overwhelming majority of institutions right now that disclose their portfolio emissions, for example, and this presumed underreporting of portfolio emissions would not be because of this. It wouldn't be a surprise that financial institutions here are also underestimating climate-related risks. Now, um, financial institutions' alignment of their portfolios with a net zero economy in mind is also lagging. So that's something that the financial sector could and investors could work on. Um, the investors or institutions could embrace, for example, active ownership and engage with their portfolios. They could ask or maybe insist on companies they finance that they be prepared for low carbon transition. It's also imperative that financial institutions do more to improve governance. And while most institutions report some board level of oversight on climate related issues, it is largely focused on their direct operations and not so much in terms of financing activities. So on the financing side, there's a lot to do. It's encouraging to see a lot of action towards that in the private sector and also in terms of regulatory support. Regulators now even here, are increasingly moving towards mandatory climate disclosures in line with what's being done overseas. And yeah, there's substantial. I mean, disclosure is a very simple thing, but I think a very powerful thing. Disclosure. There's substantial evidence that disclosure leads to action, and now's the time for financial institutions to make good on their commitments, their statements, to disclose portfolio emissions and align their portfolios towards a net zero objective. The role of investors, for example, at Union Bank, we have integrated systematic use analysis assessment of environmental, social, and governance factors in our investment process. In terms of both using this internal ESG framework as a tool for evaluating risk of companies and issuers. And later on, we are excited to say that we are going to be launching products that are integrated in terms of ESG. And we're very excited in that particular space. So I think that's a very long answer to your very short question. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. It's really quite interesting, but I'm going to poke a little bit now, right? I mean, we know that the transition to a net zero world is very important. Just living day by day, right, with climate changing, left, right, and center, with impact on the environment really being more pronounced, right? It's clear that it is something that requires investments. But on the investor side, right, what matters is returns. So it's a beautiful concept. It's a great concept. It's great that they've had 26 of these climate change conferences and a commitment of going down to 1.5 degrees by 2050. Right. So maybe I ask a question a little bit to Jean-Louis, since Lombardier has been doing sustainability far longer, I guess, than anybody else in this industry. Like, does it really provide returns for the investor, or is it just something that I invest, I feel good, I'm doing something for the environment, protecting the world for my generation, great. But in terms of returns, what makes you convinced that sustainability is something that will drive future returns? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Jean-Louis.
Vanessa, you just say will drive, and I think it's very important to say will drive, because if your question was just before, how can you prove that in the past ESG and sustainability has outperformed, my answer would have been quite blunt and would have consisted in saying not only I cannot prove, but I have strong suspicion that it did not outperform for a very good reason. For a very good reason, in that if it did outperform, it would be not normal, because it would mean that the market would have rewarded good behaviors in terms of environment and will have penalized bad behaviors, which obviously was not the case, because if it were the case, we would not be in the dramatic situation we are today in terms from an environmental point of view. Okay, and that's precisely because until a recent past, the market did not reward good behavior, positive externalities in terms of environmental behavior, and did not penalize bad behavior, that we are in the situation we are today. So if, frankly speaking, even if it's very difficult to answer this question for the past, there is a high suspicion that there was very good reason not for ESG strategies and sustainable strategies not to outperform in the past. Having said that, it's exactly the same reason why we are convinced that for the future, sustainable strategies will outperform. Precisely because things are changing, and are changing dramatically fast. Because people are getting more and more aware that what we have done so far, the way we have run the economy, what we call internally at Bombardier the wild model for wasteful, idle, loop-sided, and dirty. This way of running the global economy has to change, and not only investors, business owners, more importantly, first business owners realize that they are facing an environment in which their business will be completely disrupted by the environmental changes. The COVID situation has been a good experience to see that we need to have economies and business much more resilient to unexpected shock, which are more or less related to the environment. Regulator, of course, and we see every day new regulation in every part of the world, and this summer has been particularly rich in China, for instance, about the necessity to comply with more environmental friendly behaviors. And ultimately, of course, investors and the community of investors that need also not only to invest sustainably to comply with a set of regulation and a set of collective society requirements, but also because increasingly, because all of this ecosystem will reward good environmental behavior and penalize bad environmental behavior, the fact to have a portfolio really made of securities of companies that have a clear strategy to adapt their business model to this new, not wild, but what we call internally click. It's a trademark from Bombardier, click for circular, lean, inclusive and clean economy. For all those companies which are changing their business model to adapt to this click environment, who are changing their business model and their practices and their strategy to become carbon neutral by 2050, and to be on a trajectory in terms of temperature that will be consistent with the net zero objective by 2050, they will be rewarded and they will be more resilient to shock, and they will avoid many traps that the other companies will be facing. So it has become key in terms of investment. And as June said, you need processes not only to incorporate those methodologies, you need a clear methodology to assess companies, and it's very important to be deep enough to avoid the pure, greenwashing, because uncertainty, each time you have a big wave of innovation, you have many players who try to insert themselves in that move with a lack of commitment or serious commitment. So you have to be quite selective in choosing your investment partners to make sure that you have a methodology behind which is really deep. And we are very proud at Bombardier to be among the few active contributors to the TCFD's work in terms of portfolio alignment temperature, and not only among the very few, but we are the only global bank / asset management institution to have contributed to those works and methodology. And today we are implementing this methodology. We are implementing a new metric such as implied temperature rise or climate value impact into our portfolio to transform the objectives, the strategy, not only the business practice related through ESG scoring, but also the strategies and the trajectory in terms of temperature alignment by 2050 of more than 20,000 companies into a set of metrics that allow us to discriminate them and to outweigh in our portfolio not only the low carbon emitters, but also the high carbon emitters, which have clearly a credible strategy to become in the future low carbon emitters and to contribute not to make the global temperature rise too fast and too much.
Thank you. So we don't have that much time, but I do have a couple of questions precisely on the whole greenwashing and really leading the companies who are really doing it right. June, you mentioned that the financial sector has a huge role to play, and that starts with disclosures and transparency and metrics. The Philippines, let's face it, is not exactly known for the land of complete, comprehensive, and clean data, right? How can the Filipino investor identify these companies, at least the local or domestic companies, separate the greenwashers from the actual companies that are contributing to the transition? Just very quickly, can they do it alone?
They can do it alone, but you don't need to do it alone, because you can find a partner like Lombard ODA or UnionBank, private banking, UnionBank, that's already done the hard work, looking at factors, for example, that give us a sense of how a company is dedicated, committed to important causes such as net zero. It could be simply understanding their current level of greenhouse gas emissions and where do they want to be, water consumption, use of renewable materials in their business or service, waste management. I mean, there's a lot to process, but it takes commitment to do that, and they could partner up with people who've done it, or they could really take the time to research and ultimately embody that worthy cause. So
there's hope, because there is the financial sector that is there to help. Now, just a final question before we go to your closing remarks is, is sustainability really a long-term play? Do I have to wait till 2050 to get returns? I don't think I'll be alive in 2050, but what is the investment horizon for sustainability themed product or investment? June and Sean, your thoughts.
My answer is very, very quick. There's evidence already that investing in companies that rate high from a sustainability or ESG standpoint actually support number one, lower cost of capital, and support long-term shareholder value creation. Because I'll leave it to Jean-Louis to complete the answer.
Oh, sorry, you're on mute. Yes.
Sorry, it has to be a long-term play. Okay, you cannot play sustainability, for the next 6 months as you will play Japan equities because you believe that the fiscal plan, the current fiscal plan, will reflect the economy for the next 12 months. So it has to be a long-term play. What does it mean? It means that you invest in sustainability because you believe that everything we just said with June makes sense. That going forward, companies that comply will do better than companies who do not comply, that companies who adapt will do better than companies who do not adapt. And those later will even disappear, actually. And it has to be a long-term play. And in the long term, and it will not be linear. Maybe at the beginning, you will not see the difference. But the more the regulation, the pressure will bite, the more the costs of bad environmental practice will start to bite and to be invoiced by the market, the more your portfolio will start to make a difference versus the overall universe. You will see it through the passage of time. It has to be a long-term play. So choose your partner, choose the methodology you feel comfortable with, you believe makes sense, and then stay invested into this as part of your global equity portfolio.
Yes, thank you so much. And sorry, but I got carried away because it was a very insightful discussion. But since you mentioned long term, we do have the next gen of their families attending today, and of course, sustainability not just as an investment, but sustainability in terms of the family values, the legacy. These are things that the participants will need to look after, especially preserving the family's wealth. Sonny, Jean-Louis, and June, I will give you 30 seconds to impart your seasoned words of advice for our next gen participants, and we start with Sonny.
Okay. So basically, I would suggest that members would have everything in order. Okay. So if the house is not in order, you have to identify the roles of each member, or involve as many as possible. Okay. And second, I implore you to avail of the services of our RMs and the resource persons to help manage and fix the aspect of the family matters. Because as we know, family members are busy operating or managing their businesses, or they don't have the expertise in handling such aspect. For example, taxation. I will tell you, taxation is not the best thing to handle on your own. So I implore you, use the resources available with UnionBank Private Banking.
Thanks. And June, what message do you have for our next gen audience?
30 seconds, right? So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I really encourage you to immerse yourself and take advantage of the wealth of information that will be coming at you the next 2 days. And then I'll give Jean-Louis more time to talk. So yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, June. I will say that we spoke a lot about the disruption on the environmental side. Think about all the other disruptions, and they are articulated to some extent in terms of policy regime. What will be the role of governments and the big public sector in the future? How the global capitalism will be managed? We see that there are already some big difference between what is happening in China and in the US, for instance. And from there, what are all the disruptions that your business may face, your family business may face, and how to adapt to it? It's part of the sustainability, as you said, Vanessa. But sustainability is a very large subject. It's not only environmental situation. Technology, of course, everyone knows and has in mind that it will be extremely disruptive, but it might be also disruptive in terms of inequalities. And what does it mean for the rest of the story?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Jean-Louis, June, and Sonny, for participating in our panel. Wish we could go on because it has been quite an engaging subject. But thank you so much. And we do hope that the participants managed to pick up some key learnings today. We can't go around with blinders on. As mentioned by Jean-Louis, we need to be aware of our surroundings, what's happening around us, and be able to quickly adapt. And this is what humanity is all about, being able to adapt and being resilient to the changes, but obviously not doing it alone, doing it with your family members and your trusted partners. So once again, thank you so much. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to your relationship managers, and of course, they will be happy to provide more information. Thank you very much for viewing our panel.
Thank you, Jean-Louis, Sonny, June, and Vanessa for that very informative discussion on investments and for your relevant and interesting thoughts on sustainable investing. Now, for the next part of our program, let us now invite Lee Wong, Head of Wealth Planning, Asia Lombardo-Rier, for her segment on family wealth management. Lee Wong is responsible for Lombardo-Rier's wealth planning and family services proposition, which is a key component of the bank's growth strategy in the region. Before joining Lombardo-Rier, Lee amassed over 20 years of experience in the wealth management industry. She joined from UnionBank Privé in Singapore, where she was head of wealth planning for South Asia and was responsible for leading a team advising high net worth clients on their family wealth transition, family governance, as well as philanthropic aspirations. Lee is a member of the MAS EDB Family Office Work Group, as well as the Wealth Management Institute's expert panel on family offices. She is a regular trainer for Singapore Management University for IBF certification on wealth planning and family offices. And Lee holds a Bachelor of Laws from the National University of Singapore, and she's also a chartered trustee appointed by the Singapore Trustee Association. Now, friends and guests, without further ado, may we call on Lee to talk about family services.
Hello, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I have been involved with the UBP team in your Next Generation program for a number of years. And for me, this is like a little baby for me, and it has been growing from strength to strength. So thank you very much for all your participation. I hope you enjoy this afternoon with us. Given the fact that this is another remote session like last year, we decided that we're going to give you more interaction. I'm going to cut short my talk today compared to last year. You will hear more of each other. There will be a case study that I hope that you will enjoy participating and discussing amongst yourself. So let me get to the presentation bit. Kat, can you put on the slides? Thank you. Okay, so when we look at sustaining family wealth, first and foremost, we have to consider what comprises our family wealth. In order to build an effective strategy in relation to a successful wealth transition, we have to be aware that there are other aspects of wealth beyond our financial capital. Kat, next slide, please. Jump to the next one. Thank you. So when we think about wealth, instinctively, we think about things we own. Money in the bank, real estate, our family business, artwork, maybe wine, gold, our bitcoins. So these are what we call our financial capital, the most visible aspects of your family wealth. And it comprises both your movable as well as your immovable assets. There are other capitals of wealth, your human capital, your family capital, as well as your social capital. First and foremost, let's look at human capital. As the name suggests, it relates to the individuals that comprise your family. It has two components. One, intellectual capital. That is the knowledge base and the skill sets that your family possesses through you via its family members. The second component of your human capital relates to its structural capital. And that refers to how a family organizes itself, the way you make decisions, the way you resolve disputes. Family capital then refers to how you get on with one another within the family, the trust, the respect, and the camaraderie amongst family members. Lastly, you have your social capital, which also comprises two components. One, that's your inner spiritual capital. That refers and draws its values from your belief system, your value system, your purpose. And then you have your outer societal capital, which is in essence the expression of your human capital as well as your inner spiritual capital to the larger world, creating networks and your place in society. Most families believe that wealth preservation is about successfully managing your financial wealth. This emphasis alone leaves out the growth of the other capitals of wealth. We need to recognize that the various forms of capital, they are interlinked. They're highly related to one another. Human behavior determines whether a family preserves its wealth. We've all heard of stories of family wealth being dissipated as a result of family disputes. And family disputes are often a function of not properly managing family members feeling disgruntled, feeling overlooked, or unfairly treated. So when we focus on managing our human capital well, we build self-esteem and the identity of family members independent of wealth. We develop a sense of purpose in our family members, and we develop skills and capabilities in them so that they are able to thrive and make it independently. This Asian families, we do very well. We educate our children very well, and many of you have a lot of experiences out there, a lot of internships or work experiences that are very rich. So when it comes to the human capital, the intellectual capital aspects, Asian families do very well. The structural capital bit is the one that unfortunately, a lot of families don't do very well, and that's fairly common. Even Western families are the same. It's not instinctive for people to look at the structural capital aspects, because if you want to be able to make decisions and resolve differences fairly as a family, this part needs a lot of work, needs a lot of intention. So when we look at human capital and we focus on beefing up our structural capital, we create stability in the family. When we focus on enhancing our family capital, we create an atmosphere of openness that facilitates honest conversations in the family. And when we focus on our social capital in relation to our inner spiritual capital, then we have shared values, with shared beliefs that guide us in the way we utilize our financial capital, in the way we build our financial capital. Indeed, the pursuit of happiness of each individual family member is important for the successful preservation of family wealth as a whole. Next slide, please. Kat? So when we look at roots of conflict, why do family members fight? There are many different causes of conflict. Sometimes it's because family members want incompatible things and they do not see eye to eye. If you are working in a family business together, and when the family is looking to branch out into a different venture, perhaps different family members have different points of view in relation to what new business segment they want to get into if they can't see eye to eye. Or certain family members might feel that it's about time to sell the family business. Let's liquidate, and then we have a family office and manage our financial assets. But other family members may not agree. Some may want to hire an external CEO because they feel that none of us deserve to take this position. None of us are qualified. But others may feel that I'm totally qualified. So they may want incompatible things. Sometimes they may want the same thing. If you have several family members working in the business and it comes to the point of time where an elder generation is about to retire, perhaps all the next generation in the family business may decide that they all deserve to be the next CEO, and they want the same thing. They cannot see eye to eye. So conflicts arise. Very often it is due to a lack of trust, resulting in misunderstandings among family members. If you observe amongst your friends and families that you are familiar with, and you see corridor conversations, a lot of times it's a result of insecurity. And insecurity is often a function of lack of information that causes people to suspect one another. And perceptions are often much worse than the truth. When we look at perceptions of unfairness and unmanaged expectations, these often results in family disputes. You may have a family that grows from wealth to substantial wealth. And in the early years, when they have younger children, they may be in a situation where, sorry, I don't know why this pops up. Is this mine? Sorry. Okay. My apologies, my screen is causing some problems. So when you have unmanaged expectations and unfairness, people may get unhappy with one another. And sometimes it may not be intentional. If you have a family that is not as wealthy as in much earlier years, and you have older children that were younger at the point of time where the family was less wealthy, the amount of distributions and the amount of benefits that the older children may receive may be different from the younger children who were born at a time where the families are much much wealthier. So this may create unmanaged expectations and a sense of entitlement in the younger children because they were receiving more benefits in their younger days. So when they become adults in the future, they may expect that similar treatment to be given to them, although they are already adults. But older siblings who may be raised at a time when the family were more thrifty may find that they're not used to asking for handouts from their families for certain provisions of well-being. So that disparity in treatment may result in differences in expectations from the family. It may also result in perceptions of unfairness. Emotional issues could result from younger days, from treatment in the younger days, where there were disagreements among family members that causes family members to find that they might not be happy about another family member, but they do not want to bring the issue out into the open to resolve it. And those emotional issues could result in larger disputes in the future. So if you look at the Reliance family, between the two brothers, the disputes went back a long way. And it was because of certain issues that arise in their childhood, in their early years, that resulted in massive blow up in the later years within the family business. So issues like that can cause a lot of problems for the family. So when we look at the various capitals of wealth, it is often a lack of focus on the health of the other capitals of wealth besides financial capital that leads to conflict. Next slide, please. When we look at a family enterprise, we need to consider the differences between family drivers and enterprise drivers. A family is a place of affection and permanent relationships. It is emotion-based. There is clear and unconditional belonging within a family, which often results in subconscious behavior as well as a feeling of entitlement. An enterprise, on the other hand, is a place of formalized process and temporary relationship. It is task-based, and conditional belonging is given based on your competency. If you're not good at what you're doing, then you have no place within an enterprise. So these two are conflicting. A family is inward-looking. It's somewhat of a socialist system. Baseline welfare is what they aim to provide for all family members to make sure that everyone is taken care of. If you are looking at a succession plan within the family, you will often find patriarchs and matriarchs saying that, I would like to make sure that all family members are educated up to a certain level. I would like to make sure that medical care is provided for all my bloodline descendants. So baseline welfare is very important on the family front. Goal of a family is to maintain harmony. An enterprise, on the other hand, is outward looking. It's more of a capitalist system and it rewards performance. Its goal is to achieve performance and productivity. So what is fair, what is considered fair in a family is often equality. Although it begs the question whether equity is the same as equality, whether equality actually results in fairness. So that's a discussion that families are often advised to consider about putting fairness in context, whether equality necessarily equates to fairness. On the business front, on the other hand, fairness is meritocracy. People who are good at what they're doing deserves to be rewarded, deserves to rise in the organization. So they're fairly different systems. When you look at a family, it tends to minimize change and tend to stick to how things are historically done. Business front, you tend to exploit change. You want to utilize what is changed to be able to capitalize market share. Roles within a family, generally, it's based on relationship, and power is based on birthright and generational status. When you look at an enterprise, the roles within an enterprise is based on functions, and power is based on title. So when you look at decisions being made in a family, very often it is emotional. Decisions on the enterprise front, generally rational. At home, the reward that people seek, family members seek, is love and affirmation. At the work front, reward is remuneration. You look for paying premiums, you look for promotions, you look for bonuses. It's on the remuneration front. It is worthy to note that even when family members fight over money, at times it is more about their perception of their place in the family than the money itself. In a family enterprise, the fact that the drivers behind the two arenas are conflicting creates tension and vulnerability to disputes. A family enterprise has to decide which comes first, family or enterprise. This affects the principles behind how decisions are made. If you take leadership succession, for example, for a family that views family enterprise as a symbol of family and a source of family pride, decisions with regards to who runs the enterprise should be made purely on the basis of competency. Factors such as birth order, gender should be irrelevant. For a family that places family first, family drivers will usually prevail. Relationships and generational status will be considered. Decisions are generally made with a view to preserve harmony. A family I worked with once, the eldest son was in the family business for a very long time. So when it comes to the point where the current CEO, the father, was about to retire, at that time, all his children are all grown up, and he felt that his younger son actually has more business acumen. The elder son is more cautious, and he feels that to bring the business to the next frontier, perhaps the youngest son is more suitable than the eldest one. But because in consideration of how they are as a family, when they were putting their family governance system in place, they decided that they were a family first family. And for him, he felt that for the family, they needed to preserve the family harmony and to extract the eldest son out from the role that he was currently playing was going to cause a lot of disruption within the family. So they made a decision to keep the eldest son as the future CEO to be once he retires. But he placed a group of trusted people around the eldest son to support him, and he implored the other siblings to contribute to the family business by supporting the brother. So different families may come to different conclusions based on their assessment of what works best for their individual families. Next slide, please. Kat? Yes, that's right. Thank you. So when you look at a family enterprise and we look at the family orientation front, the attributes of family orientation are things like security, stability, a focus on continuing with tradition, interdependence amongst family members, and loyalty. But when you look at the enterprise front, enterprise orientation has attributes such as risk-taking, growth, innovation, autonomy, as well as competition. So the sustainability of a family enterprise is dependent on the health of your family enterprise orientation. And what this means is that it refers to the attributes and mindsets of a family to engage in entrepreneurial activities. It draws on both the family orientation and the enterprise orientation. So a family enterprise orientation basically combines the attributes that are prototypical to the family and the business domain. It is first and foremost reflective of their family goals to ensure family unity, as well as a desire of a family to control its activities over time. So your attributes of security, stability, and loyalty will remain. At the same time, it draws on the attributes of enterprise orientation. While things like risk-taking and competitive aggressiveness may not be so important for a family firm, but attributes like innovation and autonomy, those have greater meaning in transgenerational value creation. So if you take Lombard Odier, for example, we are a 220-over-year-old organization, a family firm. So I have to say, we are fairly conservative in our lending. That reflects our focus on the family orientation in terms of security and stability. We want to make sure that the family firm continues. We need to protect and preserve. So when we look at issues around lending, we are probably more conservative than the UBSs and the Credit Suisse of the world. We do have a Tier 1 ratio of 29.7%. So we are one of the best capitalized bank globally. So naturally, our lending habits will be different from other organizations with a Tier 1 ratio in the teens, in the 15s, 17s. So we differ on that front. But we embrace innovation. We embrace autonomy. So you find that within the firm, even as employees, we are constantly asked to rethink everything, to consider how can we do better in our respective field? How can we challenge the norm? How can we innovate? So that is a nature that we embrace as an organization. So you find that in order for a family enterprise to persist and to sustain, you need to capture the essence of both your family orientation and your enterprise orientation to be able to preserve that innovation and autonomy to be able to grow and transit across generations. Kat, next slide, please. So this model, if you have attended courses on the governance space, this is a very commonly used model in the family governance space. It's called the Taguri and Davis three-circle model. And essentially, it exhibits the three different systems within a family enterprise. Within these three systems of family, enterprise, and ownership, there are 7 different roles. Number 1, you have the family member. Number 2, you have the non-family manager. This is your employee. Then you have number 3, a non-family owner. This is your investor. So if your company is listed, it will be people who buy your stocks from the stock exchange. It could be maybe a PE investor, a venture capitalist that you're working with. Then you have 4, a family owner. So a family member that owns some shares. It could be a relative, it could be a mom, family members who own shares but do not work in the family business. Then you have a number 5, non-family owner manager. So this is somebody who works in the family business, owns some shares but not a family member. So this could be a long-time staff that you would like to retain in the family enterprise for the long run. You give him some shares to encourage him to stay, to give him some ownership. So this one will be a number 5. Then you have number 6, a family manager. So a family member who works in the family enterprise but does not own any shares. So this one could be a next generation family member who's working in the family enterprise and earning his stripes within the family enterprise. And lastly, you have role number 7, which is the family owner manager. Maybe an older family member and within the elder family generation owns shares, family member works in the business. So if you look at all these different roles, they have different perspectives and they have different responsibilities. So if you imagine a family with 3 adult children, and you have Peter, who is number 7, a family owner manager. He works in the business. The business is his career, and he's been working there for a very long time. And you have his sister, Jane, who is a family owner. She owns some shares in the family business, but she works outside. And then you have John, who is a family member. He does not own any shares. He does not work in the family business. Each one of them will see the world very differently. If you analyze the family system, in the family system, the focus is on inclusion, and it factors in individual diversity in the hope that I can pull everyone together. Despite us having individual diversity, we would like to bring everyone together in an inclusive unit. So the roles of family members is to define family values, family principles, priorities, responsibilities, and needs, to provide one another with unconditional love and acceptance, to support and care for one another. So in the example I gave, so John, who is a family member, who is not holding on to any family shares, not working in the family business, he may feel that, well, I am a family member, so I'm entitled to be taken care of this because that's what family members do. Simply because I'm family. I don't have to work in a family business or own any shares. People need to take care of me just because I'm family. When you look at the ownership front, the ownership system, the focus is on preservation and to achieve risk diversification to preserve this asset that I own. So the role of an owner is to define business values, to provide a vision and a set of goals for my business manager. I want to establish policies, select good directors to run the enterprise well for me so that I can preserve business value. So Jane, who owns some shares, may then feel that, well, my brother, who is a manager in the business, it is his job to run the business well so that I get a decent dividend stream and to preserve the value of my shares. Then when you move to the enterprise system, the focus is on performance, is to create business growth. The role of a business manager is to develop and implement business strategy, to establish culture, to drive business performance. I establish recruitment and reward policies so that my employees are going to drive business performance well to provide business leadership. So from Peter's perspective, he might want to be able to utilize cash flow where need be so that I can hire more people to grow the business and to enter into new ventures to increase market share. So the concerns and motivations of each family member may differ as a result of their vantage point from their different roles and their different perspectives. Expectations and perceptions of one another may give rise to conflicts if it's left unspoken, unresolved. Business expansions, business downturns, hostile takeovers, leadership changes, secessions are potential conflict triggers that may result in family members having dispute issues and enterprise and ownership arenas, having conflict dilemmas. So if there is an offer, for example, to buy the business at incredibly good price, Peter, Jane, and John, the three individuals we've mentioned earlier, how would they react? They were very likely to react differently. So Peter, who is in the business, may feel that, I'm going to lose my job if the business is sold. So what if the price is good? I don't want to sell. Jane may feel that, come on, this is a good value. We should sell it. We can always get into another new venture because she has got a career outside. So her perception may be different. And John could either be indifferent or feel that, well, is there anything in it for me? If we sell the business, am I going to get anything? Because I'm not a shareholder, I'm not in the business. So am I going to get something just simply because I'm a family member? Shouldn't I be getting something? So the perception of each individual family member could be very different. Next slide, please. So when you look at the conflict triggers, they can arise in any of these three systems, and they can cause a variety of financial or non-financial triggering events that can impact the entire family wealth system. If you look at the family front, the trigger events could be anything from birth and adoption, marriage, unions. This could result in new family members. And that might result in trigger points in the ownership fund and the enterprise funds as well. When you look at issues around divorce, serious illness, family members migrating overseas, children leaving home, deaths, those result in a change of family structure, and that could be a potential trigger point. You might have differing views and differing personalities within the families, feelings of jealousy, insecurity, and not being loved, power play within the family, external influences, secrets being revealed, impacting the family history. So all these are potentially trigger events resulting in conflicts. When we look at the enterprise front, the trigger events for conflicts could be decline in the business, liquidation of the business, disruptors, business disruptors that could affect the health of the family business, regulations that could impact the business, key personnel's leaving, sale of the business, restructuring. You may have new partners and new ventures in the business. These could all be potential conflict trigger events. Unclear leadership, succession policies, and employment policies or reward and remuneration benchmarks could result in conflicts. And then when we look at the ownership front, selling of your business shares, bankruptcy, succession and structuring, these are potential trigger events that can impact the other parts of the family wealth system. Unclear protocols with regards to the allocation of shares and profits, as well as an unclear exit options, could all be trigger events for conflicts. So given how interlinked each of these systems are with one another, it is important to focus on properly managing the communication process within the family and how decisions are made within the family. Next slide, Ken. As a family grows in size across the generations, the decision-making process increases in complexity. At the owner-manager stage, decision-making is fairly easy. The owner-manager is all things to all men. Essentially, he calls the shots. So you can't have quick decisions. You're able to act nimbly. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best decisions. It just means that things can be done easily. And that nimbleness often results in giving the family business an edge and market share in the particular industry they're in. There are also downside in the owner-manager situation where you may have key man risk. In business continuity may be a risk when you have a single owner-manager calling all the shots. And often the owner-manager may have difficulty letting go when it's time to transit. And that impacts the empowerment of the next generation and the interest of the next generation to take over the business, and that has adverse effects on business transitions. So when we move to the sibling partnership stage, at this stage, the number of decision makers have increased, and naturally with it comes complexity. At this juncture, you have fragmented ownership now, fragmented to a small group of siblings. Within the same generation, there may not be an accepted family hierarchy, and siblings may consider each other as equals, even though they have a birth order. So whatever the age gap or the birth order, they may view each other as equals. So you may find that there can be conflicts in the way you make decisions because everybody feels that they have a say and they have an equal right and equal say. At this oligarchy stage, meaning a control by a small group, what is good is that at this stage, the group is still small enough for natural governance to persist, because these siblings, they grew up together, they have disagreements and differences as they are growing up. They have a certain natural way of resolving their differences amongst themselves. So on the basis of that, natural governance can still assist them to be able to make decisions together. So despite the fact that there may be some differences in opinions, they will refine their art of negotiation and their arguments to gain consensus. So normally at this stage, they try to come to unanimous decisions and have consensus with one another. And these diverse opinions often results in better decisions and to build stronger teams. So as you then move to the cousin consortium stage, at this juncture, the number of decision makers have increased exponentially. The third generation cousins are unlikely to accept anything except for equality amongst themselves, particularly across family branches. Given their difference in family backgrounds, educational backgrounds, and work experiences, natural governance is unlikely to exist. So at this stage, if let's say, taking the example we had just now with the three children, at a cousin consortium stage, you would have easily 9 family members, and if your elder generations of the 3 in the sibling partnership stage are still around, you have 12 crossing 2 generations. So If you do not have an agreed governance framework in place, it is very challenging to make good decisions together. So at this stage of fragmented shareholding, it is not possible to achieve consensus because the number of decision makers that you have is too many. So at this juncture, family members would then have to work at deciding how does democracy actually look like amongst us? What kind of decisions require what kind of majority for decision making? Do we need 50% vote for certain decisions and 75% vote for other decisions? What is the sufficient quorum? What kind of representation do I need from a branch level? So once they have organized that governance framework in place, however, this actually is the most stable stage because you can then achieve control and fairness. Next slide. So when we look at family governance, what we are trying to work on then is to improve our other three capitals of wealth that I've mentioned earlier. Your inner spiritual capital in relation to your social capital, your values, your beliefs, your purpose, your structural capital aspect of your human capital, your decision-making process, and your family capital, your communication process. So there are three dimensions to governance. On a business governance front, that I think many of us are familiar. It refers to the legal and factual framework that we have in place for the management and the supervision of a company. Basically, this refers to your rules and your protocols that a board of directors actually utilizes to ensure that business is fair and transparent in its dealings with its stakeholders, be it investors, clients, your employees, and regulators. Then when we look at family governance, what does it do? It defines a framework for the involvement and decision-making within the family. And it promotes family unity and thereby ensuring the continuity of the family hierarchy. Governance essentially creates accountability and responsibility. It deals with the control mechanism in the entrepreneurial family. And depending on the entrepreneurial and family constellation, meaning how big and how complex the family constellation is, the need for control and monitoring mechanism will differ in complexity. Lastly, you have the ownership governance. This defines the rights and the duties of owners to promote stewardship, emotional attachment, and responsibility to the legacy of the family business. This aims to strengthen and consolidate the sense of belonging of family members belonging to the owner family of the family enterprise and to strengthen their identification to the family company. This is extremely important because the strength of a family business lies in its ability to harness both its economic value as well as emotional value. So economic and emotional value are both important, and that draws it apart from a normal commercial enterprise. So if you look at a normal commercial enterprise with a pure investor as its shareholder, compared to a family enterprise where you have a family member as a shareholder, the fact that a family enterprise is able to draw on the emotional value of a family and family owner is what makes its difference. Remember our discussion about family enterprise orientation and the question of stability, security, loyalty. That loyalty element, the emotional attachment element, makes a family shareholder, makes decisions for the longer term better good of the family enterprise that gives family enterprises stability. Next slide, please. So when you look at the importance of family governance, the purpose of family governance is to transmit family values, to formalize a decision-making process, and to facilitate discussions. And by doing so, you're then able to achieve harmony. A good family governance ensures transparency. Transparency in relation to what? Transparency in relation to how rules are made. What are those rules and how those rules are applied? So by doing so, you then are able to allow family members to feel that they are fairly treated. There is a fair process and there is fair treatment. And by achieving that, you will build trust and manage expectations within the family. And as a result of that, you create stability and continuity within the family business. Next slide, please. So when you look at the three pillars of your family business, essentially, it is love, trust, and respect. We need to anchor love and emotional attachment of family members for the family business so that you build responsible shareholders who are emotionally attached to the family business. And you do so by family stories, by internship with the family business, family projects, to create engagement and attachment to the family business as early as possible amongst family members. Good family governance and honest and open communication leads to transparency. It leads to clear criteria and clear process, which results in a feeling of fair treatment. And as I said earlier, then that leads to trust and manage expectations. And when I trust, I respect the system and I respect the people within the system. So you get stability and continuity of the family business when you can anchor these three areas. Next slide. So when we look at the principles of family governance, on the family front, we seek fair process. And what is fair process? It is the process of establishing ground rules that all family members agree upon, and it is formulated on the basis of an agreed value system and agreed decision-making process. So family members have to agree, how do we make decisions together? This is the forum we're going to do it. We're going to vote by 75% majority vote, for example. So you have an agreed decision-making process, and then you have an agreed value system, and then you formulate those rules. It has to be created in a safe and open forum where all voices can be heard. We emphasize all voices because in order to ensure that everyone accept that these rules govern them, they need to feel that they were part and parcel of making those rules. So their concerns need to be heard. All options that are tabled by family members need to be considered and need to be discussed, thought through, put aside on the basis of thorough discussions. So when you formulate the rules that way, having considered all options raised by everyone, then people feel that I was part of the process and my views were valued, I was respected, I was considered. And yes, based on our decision-making process, we voted 75% majority and my option wasn't chosen. But this was a decision-making process, so I aligned with it. So that's how you need to build fair process. And the rules have to be clear and communicated to everyone, so everybody understands those rules. And then these rules have to be changeable. There must be a system in place that allows these rules to be evolved over time in a decision-making process that you've agreed upon. So rules cannot be unilaterally changed. It needs to be changed in the agreed decision-making system, so people understand that the rules will evolve over time to reflect the realities of generations after generations. Then there must be a framework put in place to ensure the compliance of these ground rules. So you don't pass rules and not comply with them. That's not fair process. Fair process and fair treatment requires you to apply those rules consistently. So there must be a defined institution that is going to apply those rules so that everybody knows that those rules are complied with. Then the decision-making process should be transparent, and how those decisions are made needs to be explained to everyone, so that people can understand it, people can accept it. So that's what transparency we are looking for. So for example, if you have 3 next generation available of the right age, of the right credentials to fill a particular position in the family business. So there must be a forum in place that the family has agreed upon, let's say the family council, to pick on the right person, to select the right person to join the family business for this specific role. So we have an agreed decision-making process, we have an agreed forum to comply with those rules. There was a criteria already agreed upon in place in relation to what kind of work experience and what kind of academic background that role requires. So when these 3 individuals are submitted, their CVs were considered, they all have similar requirements. So now that we have that, how then do we choose amongst these 3? Then this particular role might require collaboration with a company in China. So when you analyze into the CV of these 3 next generation, we realize, one of them has actually done internship in a Chinese company and can speak a bit of Mandarin. So that particular next gen was selected on the basis of that. So that decision-making process must then be explained to everyone so that they understand, the other 2 in competition for that role understood, their parents understood, so that there will be no misunderstanding that, it's because he's the child of the favorite, sibling amongst the second generation. That's why this third generation next gen is able to get the role because the father was favored. We do not want any misunderstandings that way. You have to make sure that the decision-making process is properly explained so that there's transparency, people understand it, and decisions will not result in an emotional conflict because people feel fairly treated. Next time will be my turn. I will get my children to make sure that they apply for internship in a variety of industries that our family is connected in, for example. So you know what to do next so that you might get a chance the next time round. So when we look at the enterprise front, we aim for responsible owners. We want to have responsible ownership. A responsible owner embraces family values. It applies stewardship. It's emotionally attached to the family business, and he's patient with his capital. What does that mean? So he basically acts as a long-term owner of the family business. He's very patient with his capital. If for any particular year the business is going through some difficulties and we need to defer dividends, he's cool about it, because he's patient with his capital. He does not, for whatever reason, that particular year, the value of the shares of the business is very high and he decides, I need to take profit. He doesn't act like a normal detached investor. He stays in the game. So he acts like a long-term owner. And he wants the enterprise to survive long-term, preferably in the family's hands. He identifies himself with the family enterprise. That's emotional attachment. And he's interested in the family business. He wants to be informed, and he is kept updated to the situation that the family business is in. And he wants to transfer his own knowledge to the next generation, that stewardship, so that other younger family members understand what it means to be attached to the family firm. So he attributes all that qualities to make long-term decisions for the long-term benefit of the family. And when you have that, you actually increase the emotional value of the family enterprise. Just like when you have fair process in the family in relation to your decision making, you avoid disputes, and therefore you enhance the economic value of the family enterprise because you are not eroding away value through disputes. Next slide, please. So when you look at the family governance, we're talking about a process a family goes through to work out in an open and honest arena the principles that represents the family, the policies the family agrees to abide by, and the practices they've decided to utilize to anchor your principles and policies within the family. Family governance basically provides a framework for family to come together to make decisions together as a unit on key issues, to avoid personalities, individual family member personalities from getting in the way of making decisions together. It provides you an avenue to manage differences. When we look at your principles, what are we talking about? We are talking about your values, mission, and your vision. Understanding a family's base values are clarifying a family's mission as well as articulating a vision for the future for the family are major differentiators amongst families whose family businesses exist beyond the founding generations. Values, mission, and vision, they are the building block of stability, organization, and unity for the family. Without it, it is difficult for a family to inspire commitment, create continuity, as well as to build cohesion across family branches and different generations within the family. So when we look at values, what are values? These are your governing principles, your beliefs, and your behavioral guidelines that informs your actions as well as your perceptions. It is basically a code of conduct. It creates a common way of behaving. It creates clarity as well as understanding of what is accepted behavior in the family. And it builds trust then, because people understand how they need to behave. Values then forms the identity of the family and promotes family cohesion. It gets us to the question of what defines us as a family. What kind of work ethics do we have as family employees? What is right to spend on? And how do we put fairness in context in relation to who gets what? By working together on your family values, a family then can combine together the legacy of the founding generation with what they stand for, with what concerns and ideas of the next generation as to what they want to create into the future. So when you have value discussions involving the different generations, it prepares a family to work together towards common goals. When we look at mission, what is a family mission? It basically expresses the collective objective of the family in relation to why do we have to want to stay together as a family and what do we aim to achieve as a family. It sets up the intention and the purpose of the family enterprise. Your vision then is the culmination of the family and a family's mission with strategy and culture. So elements that enhances the likelihood of success in a family in creating a vision for the future is family engagement. You need to involve everyone. When you get family members involved to create an atmosphere of inclusivity, you are more likely to get everyone engaged to believe in the vision that we have for the family enterprise. And then you have to build stewardship, a sense of responsibility around wealth that looks towards the future generation. When we look at the policies, we are talking about the rules and protocols that we put in place that we agree to allow ourselves to be ruled by. Things like your family employment policy. So if your family members working in the business, what is the criteria for family employment? Do I have criteria for education? Do I have criteria for work experiences? You will hear some family enterprises say that we have a certain requirement for family members to work outside for 5 years in a related business before joining the family enterprise, for example. Then you may have family policies around how are we rewarded, how are we appraised, what are our reporting lines. Then there might be policies around leadership succession, our policies with regards to maybe engaging non-family members as leaders of the business. You may have distribution policies in relation to family entitlement, investment policies in relation to family shared funds. Let's say you have a family office. How do we invest as a family? Your definition of family. Who do you see as family members that's entitled to a family distribution? What kind of forum and protocol we have for family communication? What kind of forum do we have in place to resolve family differences? How do we exit as family members? So all these are policies that you put in place to govern one another, govern each other. And then you have practices such as family offsites, family projects, your family philanthropy to get family members to come together to do things together. Next slide, please. Yes. So when we look at the governing bodies to manage all that complexity, and we go back to the three-circle model, when we look at the enterprise side, those kind of bodies we are quite familiar with. You have your board of directors of your operating company, then you have various committees within the operating business. On the ownership front, if you're a shareholder, you get to participate in shareholders assembly. So if you have holding companies, they're holding on to family companies, then you have your board of directors of your holding companies that acts both as shareholders, family members, as well as the enterprise managers. On the family realm, on the other hand, this is a new one. So what kind of governing bodies do we need within the family? And that we have bodies such as family assembly, family council, and family committees. Next slide. So what are they? So the family assembly essentially will be the larger group, the entire family. So this is a family gathering that involves usually everyone, so that you have an arena to be able to inform everyone and provide information about the development and the course of the family business, important family events, and the future developments of the family, as well as the family enterprise. This is sometimes the forum as well for the review of your family mission statement. For example, if the family has one. So who gets to join a family and assembly? Usually all family members. Some families I've seen do not include spouses. So this is a question that the families have to decide among themselves. Do we include family of affiliation, or we only include family of blood? For families who are just starting out their family assemblies, sometimes they find that until we are more comfortable how to facilitate amongst ourselves, let's start with family by blood. And then we include family members by affiliation when we have reached stable state. So different families may operate differently on that front, but the ideal intention is to include everyone. So some families may put in place a guideline to say children of a certain age can join the family assembly to listen to information regarding the family business and family developments. So it also gives people who are not part of the family enterprise, for example, to understand what's going on, to feel engaged. We talked about building emotional attachment earlier, and it also a forum allow them to raise concerns, to voice their views, to ask questions. So let's say we talked about sustainability earlier on in the earlier segment. So if a next generation family member wonders what is our family enterprise position in the area of sustainability, how are we ensuring that our family enterprise is operating in a sustainable way, that we are protecting the earth, for example. If this young next generation family member wants to find out, are we participating in this theme, they can raise that question and ask for information at the family assembly. Okay, that's what the function of the family assembly is for. Usually you see families gathering once or twice a year for family assemblies. Then you have the family council. The family council is when you select, when you have larger families, then you sort of select and shortlist various family members from the larger family assembly to represent the whole family assembly. And these family members, generally speaking, you would like them to represent each one of your various family branch. They could be both shareholders and managers, or a variety of combinations, so that everybody's perspective is represented in this family council. And the task of this family council is generally to represent the family as one voice to the family enterprise. Represent the family's concerns. So the family, the family generally hold majority shares in the family enterprise, and the family council will then vote as one voice, representing all family members to the family board in relation to what they as owners would like the managers of the family enterprise to do. So they might be looking at decisions with regards to divestments, acquisitions, general direction of the business. This could be a forum for dispute resolution as well within the family, for decision making. And this group could potentially look at the future development of the family and various branches of the family. So if the task gets more and more over time, the family council may then branch out into various family committees. So they may then subdelegate into an investment committee. So the family council then subdelegate to an investment committee to overlook the investments of shared family assets, who will look at investment principles, making proposals with regards to strategic asset allocation, looking at the investment strategy of the family shared assets. For example, you could have the family council subdelegating to a philanthropy committee who's going to overlook the giving efforts of the family. There could be a next generation committee that looks at the training programs that are put in place to groom next generation family members to build emotional attachments. So various committees can be spun out from the family council. And then we have a very important role called the family manager. The family manager is someone with very strong interpersonal skills, very strong communication skills, and a lot of empathy. He's like this 1-800-HELP line within the family. Whenever any family member has an issue, it goes to this person. Whenever any family member is fighting with another family member, it will come to this person and sort of seek some counsel and seek some advice. So this is a very respected family member that people go to. They feel comfortable to share their concerns for facilitation. So this particular person will be very important to try to bring various family members together. And as the family council plays the role of dispute resolution, this family manager will play a part to try to facilitate differences to strengthen the family bonds within the family. Next slide. So we are at the last slide. So lastly, when you look at the family constitution basically is a document that commits and involves all family members. It is a moral document, meaning that it is not a legally binding document. And some people will ask why. Why is it not legally binding? How do we enforce it then? Well, if it's legally binding, how do you enforce a legally binding document? You end up having to sue your family members, right? So it's counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here, which is family harmony. The idea is that when you build your family constitution with fair process, I've mentioned just now, a fair process involves all family members, everyone has a voice. So you build your family constitution and you narrow down your principles, your policies, and your practices in a way where it's an open forum for everybody to understand and for everybody to share their points of views, then they will be engaged. And when they are engaged and when they believe in it, this document will bind people without it being legally binding. It will sort out the principles for managing and sharing family wealth, and it is the basis for your family governance. This will then be your concrete basis for a family's philosophy and values. It will cover things like introduction of a family. It sets out your history, your reason why we have a family constitution, and the reason why we have that is maybe 5 generations down the line, we want to build emotional attachment. So we want people to understand the history of the family. They want to understand why we have this particular document. Why is this document important? What are the aspirations of the family? It sets out your principles. What are the values of the family, your mission, your vision, and your code of conduct. So the things that we discussed earlier about your principles. Then we have the policies in place to organize the family, policies in place that organize the business, your family wealth management strategy that could be built in with your investment policy, your risk matrix, your leverage policy, sustainability considerations, then your practices in relation to your offsites, your education, your philanthropy. You may put in place succession planning considerations like ownership, rights and duties of shareholders, exit options, and miscellaneous provisions to cover, how do we review our family constitution? How do we amend it? How do we allow a particular shareholder to be excluded, for example? So these things are all captured in a family constitution. We generally ask families not to design a family constitution that's too thick and voluminous. Try to keep to no more than 10 pages. Because when it's too thick, nobody reads it. And it needs to be looked at regularly to make sure that it is something that is still relevant and sensible for the family. It's supposed to evolve over time with you generation after generation. All right? So I've come to the end of my presentation bit. Laura, are there some questions for Q&A before we go to the case study?
Yes, but Lee, first of all, thank you for that very insightful presentation. It was really enlightening to know about the family drivers and then the enterprise drivers and how this can create conflict and how conflict triggers can be mitigated through communication and decision-making become increasingly complex or vital as the family business grows, and how a family governance can also help smoothen this potential conflict triggers. A family governance strength anchored on fair process and responsible ownership. I agree with that. So
good job.
The audience, a couple of questions to start.
Yes.
But I just want to encourage the audience to please ask your questions through the chat box on YouTube, or for those who are on Zoom, you may raise your hand so you can call you and unmute you to ask a question or message in the Zoom chat box as well. Or you may direct your question to your relationship manager. So to start off, the first question would be, how to transition the family business and responsibilities to the next generation? I think that's very relevant for our next gen here present in the our entrepreneur.
Actually, this is a very big question, and there are two aspects to it. So when we talk about transiting the family business, we're talking about both the ownership component and the management component. And when you look at the ownership succession component, the transition to the next generation, frankly, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It requires a lot of discussions within the family. Some families may even think about having structures in place like trust structures, foundations to assist in the transitions, which is all well and good. But the discussion in relation to what is considered fair needs to be open within the family. Because when I look at, for example, family enterprise, do I split the shares equally amongst all family members? Or do I concentrate the shares amongst family members who are family managers who are working in the family business? There's no right or wrong, but it has to make sense for that family. So on that front, it is important that families use that fair process to have that safe forum to discuss this. Typically, I find that if you have families whereby the remuneration component, the compensation of the family managers are done properly, it is market benchmark so that they are rewarded properly within the family business, then the allocation of shares, you can do an equal share split and it doesn't cause too much hardship for people working in the family business. But many family enterprises that I see, the family managers generally sort of they take a pay cut. If they are very well educated, and a lot of next generation they were previously working in the Microsofts of the world, the Goldman Sachs of the world, and then when they come into the family business, they might take some level of pay cut because it's a little bit like community service. So when that is the practice within the family enterprise, then consideration need to be had in relation to how do I then fairly compensate these family members who are actually working in the family business. So no one size fits all, but the dialogue has to be had within the family to put families in context. So when it comes to management succession, on the other hand, I've mentioned it earlier, we need to set out very clearly the criteria for family employment, leadership succession. What kind of attributes am I looking for a family leader, so that when I actually transit the family business to the hands of the next generation, I am clear what kind of people I need to employ from the family in order to make sure that my family business persists.
Okay. Now, actually, in relation to that question, this is a follow-up. Related to that, how do you suggest now to the patriarch, to the first gen of the family, how to start formalizing the succession plan? So that baby step.
So, okay, this is a very good question, and it's a very difficult one. I find many next generation puzzled over it. There was one family I was working with since last year, and the next generation were not young. The next generation were all in the late 40s, and the elder one was already crossing to her 50s. So they're not young next generation, and they were very concerned because their father has still not articulated a succession plan. And for them, it is not because they want anything for themselves, but they were concerned that if something happens to their parents suddenly, the family unity might be broken because things are left in shambles, and because their parents have not articulated a plan. What if the family is no longer close because this is not put properly in place? So they have actually very good intentions in relation to why they're worried, but it's very difficult for a next generation to raise it to an elder generation to say, so what exactly is your succession plan? You get this worry that your parents might think that you're up to no good, right? So unfortunately, this question is often best raised by a facilitator. So get a facilitator involved, because it's much easier for a third party like us to raise it to the elder generation to say, do you realize that this lack of a succession plan causes a lot of anxiety in the next generation? If you have certain succession plan in mind, and the intention is not to pass the business, let's say, to this, or whoever, or you think you want to employ externally for a CEO. But because you've not articulated it, people are left in limbo. They can't build a career outside because they're waiting for you to call upon them. They can't be heavily investing their money because they thought that they might be drawback in the family to do certain things. So it's not because they're greedy, but because that lack of information basically puts them like this COVID period. You're left like in a limbo. You can't do this and you can't do that, and you can't really plan things appropriately. So it is easier for a facilitator, number one, to raise that issue to an elder generation to plan. Secondly, to help the next the old elder generation to think through succession is first and foremost to ask him to start thinking in his head, what does an ideal successor look like? What are the attributes I hope to seek in? What kind of qualities do I think my family enterprise require in relation to my key roles in relation to my business leader? So it is also something a next gen can raise without it sounding like I want that position. It's more like, actually, father, you have been running the business for a long time. If you are in an ideal world, what kind of people do you think you need so that our family enterprise will be able to transit from strength to strength, and make him start to articulate those roles? And when he starts the ball rolling, it's much easier for him to then continue to think about succession that way.
So once you've finally opened the minds of the first gen, now I think the next question would be how the next gen could prove that the third gen will destroy the family business peak, but in fact provide and continue the business successfully?
Another great question. It falls from the attributes. As we said, once we get that framework in place, that we are clear what are the criteria that we hope to seek in a family employee, then as a next generation, first and foremost, I need to meet those criteria. I know clearly what those criteria are, what those qualities are, what value system do I need to embrace in order to be worthy as that particular family employee. Then first I need to exhibit that. And then secondly, then in order to prove that I can do it well, find yourself small projects. Because you have to think about the position of where the elder generation is. There's a lot of risk that they're facing. And when we as elders look at children, you will always think that they're not ready. So I have a 13-year-old. This year I decided to practice hands-off. I'm not going to help him in his education anymore. I'm just going to gently ask him, do you need my help? I will always offer my help. And when he says, I think I'm doing okay, I'm just going to be hands-off. And if it means he crash and burn, then he will learn the consequences of crash and burn. And in the process of it, he will understand where he is in terms of gap from where he is today, from where he needs to be, and he learns. So as an elder generation, you need to have that resilience to be able to say, I'm just going to try not to intervene, because that learning process is what they need to build and strengthen their wings. So we need an educated elder generation first and foremost. And then the next generation need to understand that now I've been given the chance to show what I can do. I need to be not too ambitious. I request for permission for a small project. I show what I can do. I earn my stripes, strength by strength by strength. So then, they will come to the stage you'll be able to let go. Just like for me, I'll start this year because this is not a critical year. The time will come when it's a big national exam, then I know he's ready to take the big game all on his own. So you have to sort of match the pace between letting go and taking on new responsibilities.
Okay, so now once you've somehow proven yourself to your first gen, a related question would be, how would you now elevate the family business and restructuring the system without harming the family members inside the business?
So you remember the 3-circle model that we talked about just now? So which is why it's very important the family work on their governance framework first. When you have those 3 systems in place, and then you're very clear which hat you're wearing when you're having a conversation and making that decision, then you will not end up with an emotional reaction. So as you say just now, I'm trying to reform the family business to ensure that I can bring it into the new frontier. So this is an enterprise decision. I'm making a call on the basis of what's right by the company. Of course, at that level, there are two different levels. Some decisions that are more within the business are made by managers. If it is a divestment, acquisition, that's serious transformation is at the owner stage, so your family councils will get involved. So your family councils will represent the family members to say, look, we have to restructure this family business because we have these disruptions coming. If we do not do it, we will not survive. So I'm making a call on the basis of what's good and what's right for the enterprise. Of course, within that division of the business, there are certain family members. So I have to think about the casualties. What do I do? So once I make a decision on the basis of what's right by the enterprise, I need to be able to articulate what the decision is and why. We mentioned just now about fair process, transparency in decision making, and the reason for it. Then I put on my family hat back. These various individuals that are casualties in this, I need to think, what do I need to do for these people as a family member? They are family. Now they've lost a job. What do I do? How do I help them? What are their strengths? What are their qualities? How can I create positions and ventures for them that matches their capability so that they can also continue to thrive? So you have to split the decision out, explain the enterprise decision, and then make a separate decision on the basis of what's right for the family members. Okay?
Yeah, so but actually, even if you somehow help your existing family members, there's still potential conflicts along the way. So maybe a good question, follow-up question would be, what's the best setup to avoid conflicts with siblings and in-laws and other family members actually?
So if you have your family governance system in place, a lot of times by having the same value system, so once you set your value system in place, remember we talked about the value system being a code of conduct, a set of rules in relation to what we believe in, how we spend, how we behave, then in terms of your family entitlement, what am I entitled to as a family member? What am I allowed to do in relation to my freedom? Those things becomes clearer. So while you cannot completely avoid differences, when you have that set of aligned value system, people instinctively already know whether, if I want to buy a jet, whether that's going to be something that's frowned upon or whether that is going to be accepted. If I'm going to buy that Lamborghini, am I a Lamborghini driving family or am I not a Lamborghini driving family? So when you have your value system in place, half of your differences actually disappear. And when they still persist because there's some lack of clarity on that front, then you have your decision-making process in place. So when there are differences, how do we table it? Where is my forum for bringing out my issues? So I will not go and have my corridor conversations and I whisper to this other person and I do what we call in the governance space triangulation. So I'm not happy with him. I'm not going to tell him. I want to tell this other person and say, so I'm trying to gain people on my side, right? So you triangulate. That is not a healthy way to resolve issues. So when you have differences with in-laws, with siblings, you need to bring it out to the forum, which could be once a month. There is a particular forum in place where people can raise issues. Then you raise it to the forum to say, look, there is something that I'm not comfortable with, start talking about how I feel versus, he, those are a very bad way of bringing up issues. I feel a little disrespected. That might not be the intention of certain other family members, but this particular thing happened. He said this, blah, 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 and he did this, and I wasn't very happy about it. And then the council will then oversee that difference to allow the two family member to be able to resolve it. So having a proper decision-making and dispute resolution system in place helps you to avoid it escalating into a full conflict. We will always have differences as human beings. We need to be prepared for that. It will be unrealistic to think that we'll always see things eye to eye. But it's about being able to provide a forum for expression so people feel that our points of view matter. People do think about what I think about, and people do care, and I have a place to say it and air my issues, and the dispute can be resolved in a way which is intentional and which is respectful.
Thank you for that, Lee. It's unfortunate that we're running out of time and could have engaged, asked more questions. But thank you to Lee and to everyone for the very interactive discussion. We hope that you enjoyed this session and have gained new and relevant insights on being the next gen leaders of your family business. For any questions or concerns, please message your dedicated RN or email us at udprivatebanking@unionbankph.com.
Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ralph Alo, BGC Center Head of the Union. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ralph Alo, BGC Center Head of the Union Bank Private Banking Group. I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to our speaker, moderators, guests, and panelists, John Louis Nakamura, June Tarrobago, Sonny Ordonez, Vanessa Raymundo, Lee Wong, Attorney Arlene Agustin, and of course, Attorney Loraine Saguinsin. Our sincerest thanks to our strategic ally, Lombard Odier. This event wouldn't have been possible without their support. We hope that this afternoon's session has imparted you, our dear NextGen, with meaningful insights and understanding of your role as NextGen in your respective families and family businesses. For the past 2 years, we have come to accept and adjust to this new normal. A new normal wherein work is done at home, people aren't able to go out, and are only able to meet each other virtually. As NextGen, it is important to be future ready and equipped with tools to help yourself navigate this new normal and to make sustainable investment decisions that would create meaningful positive impact to your family businesses and, of course, to our society. Please stay safe and healthy. If you have any inquiries about the private banking group, you may reach out to your dedicated relationship manager or simply email ubprivatebanking@unionbankph.com. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone.